We're going to lose some.
We're going to lose most.
The state of our laws, the state of our government, the immense concentrated power of corporate wealth. Almost every union campaign is David versus Goliath.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Last week in Southern Labor, which is a segment we do pretty much every week, where we tell you what happened in the labor movement in the South. We pulled the information from Jonah Furman's newsletter, Who Gets the Bird, which compiles all this information for the entire United States. So if you want to see what's going on outside the South, subscribe to his newsletter, whogetsthebird.substack.com. With that, let's jump into new organizing for the week of October 8th through 15th. And this one I'm really excited about. 172 workers in New Orleans are seeking to form the first ever Lowe's union, and are going with an independent union inspired in part by the Home Depot workers in Philadelphia. I think that's huge to see Philadelphia, Home Depot, New Orleans, Lowe's. That's a big deal. These are two of the biggest employers in the country, and we've got more and more folks are in this kind of work, and it's about time that those be union jobs. Also, in new organizing, for More Perfect Union, Jonah covered the formation of yet another independent union, this time among 300 customer service workers at T-Mobile. So we're seeing a trend with these brand new independent unions starting from scratch. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Moving on to wins and losses for the week. Around 100 Apple Store workers in Oklahoma City voted 56-32 to join CWA, making it the second store to unionize among Apple Store chains, and it's the first with CWA. The other store organized with the Machinists outside of Baltimore. So way to go, Machinists. Way to go, CWA, breaking into Apple. There were 10 linemen from the Rawls County Electric Co-op in New London, Missouri, who voted 8-2 to join IBEW Local 2. There were 3 Lockheed Martin clericals at the Air Force Base in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, who voted 2-1 to join the Machinists District Lodge 75. And I just got to say, I love it when I see those tiny little union elections, 2-1. That's interesting. And way to go, Machinists, being willing to welcome them in, even such a small workforce. And there was one loss in the South for the week. There were 111 warehouse workers and drivers for Ryder Logistics in Hazelwood, Missouri, who voted 21-32 not to join Teamsters Local 688. Moving on to strikes and bargaining. The BMWE, the third largest rail union, has voted down its tentative agreement from the National Freight Rail Carriers and put a strike back on the table for as soon as November 19th. Nobody could have seen this coming, right? Unless, of course, you were talking to the actual railroad workers. The interesting thing about the timing, except for the fact that it's, of course, after the midterms, is that we'll likely hear vote results from the two bigger unions, BLET and SMART-TD, 1 to 2 days before the November 19th deadline. And based on the details of their tentative agreements that came out after Biden did his little victory lap, I just can't see them both ratifying, especially now that the BMWE has shown some defiance. The BMWE workers, for the most part, aren't even subject to the worst of the work-life balance issues. Plus, there's a borderline poison pill in the BLET SMART-TD TAs in its creation of self-supporting pools, which adds a whole other layer of scheduling uncertainty for the operating crafts. And that's not just me and Jonah being cranks about this. It was also covered in the New York Times. So sticking with the rail lines, elsewhere in rail votes, the SMART-MD, the SMART's mechanics division, about 2,000 members or so, and the National Conference of Firemen and Oilers, which is affiliated with SEIU, both voted to ratify their deals this week. So the count is now 5 unions to 1 in terms of who's ratified or rejected, but it only takes 1 to force a national strike, and BMWE is at least as big as the other 5 that have accepted combined. So stay tuned to the rail industry story. It is not over, despite what maybe the White House wanted you to believe. Amazon workers walked off the job in a couple of locations recently California, Illinois, and Stone Mountain, Georgia. In the fractured landscape of Amazon organizing, each of these are separate independent groups teamed up with local worker centers or union-backed organizing groups, but none have formally affiliated with an existing union. But those relationships are, of course, in flux, so we'll see if any of them do come under one union umbrella. Other strikes to occur, we had Independence, Missouri, and Knoxville, Tennessee, among Starbucks locations with strikes, while the continued closure of stores happens in Chicago, Colorado Springs, and elsewhere. So, Starbucks Workers United is still going on strike, including right here in the South in Knoxville, Tennessee, Independence, Missouri. And the store itself continues to close those that have voted to unionize. So we'll see how that plays out with Starbucks. The next one is far outside the South, but I wanted to mention it, which is that educators in Malden and Haverhill, Massachusetts, have embarked on 2 illegal teacher strikes after contract negotiations broke down. In Haverhill, a judge has issued a temporary restraining order trying to force the teachers back to work, but it's unclear if they'll comply. So I want to send my solidarity with these brave educators, and may your willingness to defy the law be an example to educators across the country. Also outside the South, the ASFME Local 397 strike at the Philadelphia Museum of Art has come to an end after 19 days on the picket line. Really just wanted to include that one thanks to our regular listener, Infinite Content, who's been keeping us posted on this action. Back home in Alabama, hundreds of paper mill workers with 3 steel workers locals at West Rock down in Cottonton, Alabama, remain locked out. Last week, or actually 2 weeks ago, the Valley Labor Report, we spoke with one of the local presidents. Meanwhile, in Jacksonville, Florida, West Rock workers held an informational picket, and the company announced it's cutting over 100 jobs in St. Paul, Minnesota. There were active transit strike threats across the country last week, including in the South, in Louisville, Kentucky, with ATU Local 1447. And Sarah Jones at New York Magazine has taken a look at the looming Teamsters strike threat at UPS, including interviews with David Levin of Teamsters for a Democratic Union, who said there's a scenario where UPS workers mobilize and they take strike action, and that affects 6% of GDP. And they win a good contract, and that would be a huge labor victory, explained David Levin, a staff director at Teamsters for a Democratic Union, which is a grassroots organization that supported O'Brien and his Teamsters United slate during the recent election. But Levin continued, I think a much bigger dream is that next August 1st, 350,000 UPS workers go on strike to take on the issues that are affecting not just them, but Amazon workers and other workers in this growing sector. So we'll see if the union is in that kind of fighting shape, or if workers in every industry surrounding UPS will also be inspired by this fight. But it definitely could be a game changer.
Having the Teamsters go on strike, the economy would come to an absolute standstill, and
6% of GDP with UPS alone.
Yeah, that includes tons of flights, tons of drivers, all the support. Probably 75% of Amazon crap is shipped with UPS, and that's a good thing. But every once in a while, you need to slap the capitalists in the face and let them know who runs this country, anyways.
Well, and based on what I'm hearing from the new president of the Teamsters and from a lot of the more militant members in the Teamsters, it sounds like they're gearing up for a big fight.
They're ready, yeah, and that brings to mind. Speak with your local UPS driver whenever they come by, especially if they're in Alabama. Ask them if they're in the union, if they're paying dues, and if not, why not? Get them involved.
Yeah, I believe Jacob has been talking with some of the Teamsters here in North Alabama, and just trying to build some connections as we prepare for this major contract fight next year.
Yep.
It could be huge.
Yeah, I can tell you they showed up on our picket line whenever we were on strike 4 years ago. So Teamsters are good folks.
They are, absolutely. So transitioning into the political fights, Lauren Kaori Gurley has a profile of the great hope of union lawyers everywhere, NLRB General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo, where she comes from and what she might deliver. And while it's hard not to feel like this is all just moving way too slow before our wannabe Volker does his wannabe Volker shock, it is worth noting that an NLRB judge did hit Starbucks with a gazelle bargaining order just this week. And speaking of labor boards, federal union leaders from AFGE, IFPTE, and NFFE are calling in labor notes for the confirmation of Ernest Dubester for another term at the head of the Federal Labor Relations Authority, as the agency languishes with a split partisan composition, as the Democrats just can't seem to check this one off their to-do list. And last week, Jacob also mentioned that there was a very good article in the Huffington Post by friend of the show, Dave Jamieson, talking about the Supreme Court case of Glacier Northwest. So highly recommend you check that out. Moving towards internal union politics, the UAW election is officially in full swing, with ballots mailing out to some 1 million active members and retirees. I know my father-in-law, he just got his ballot in the mail yesterday. So for the call, Jane Slaughter and Barry Eidlin break down what's at stake in the vote and why the showdown between the eternally incumbent Administration Caucus and the UAWD Caucus, a driving force behind the one member, one vote movement, is so significant. So definitely will be interested to see how the UAW election shakes up. And we don't usually cover corporate moves per se, but the Kroger-Albertsons merger deal is a big deal for labor. The grocery Leviathan would leapfrog UPS to become the largest private sector employer of union members at something like 460,000 workers, well over 400,000 of whom would be UFCW members across a stunning 500 contracts. The union released a statement, as did the Teamsters, who represent about 18,000 workers at the represented grocery stores. And finally, since this has been one of the biggest labor stories this week, I wanted to add that Amazon Labor Union was unsuccessful in their attempt to organize a second Amazon facility in New York. The ALU lost nearly 2-1, and while I'm sure there are plenty of hot takes flying around about what happened, I want to extend my appreciation and solidarity to all of those involved in that struggle. Please keep your head up. It's worth remembering that we're going to lose some.
We're going to lose most.
Yeah. I mean, given the state of our laws, the state of our government, and the immense concentrated power of corporate wealth, almost every union campaign is sort of a David versus Goliath fight. And even more so when we're talking about a scrappy, grassroots, independent, newly formed union taking on one of the most powerful corporations on planet Earth. We're going to have some defeats and we're going to have some setbacks. But to those Amazon workers in New York and all of us working class folks who are watching, we have to remember to pick ourselves up when we get knocked down.
Yeah, and those elections, especially with Amazon, get much more coverage than they actually should. And so whenever you get a loss like here in Birmingham and up there in Albany, then it makes the optics look worse than it actually is. I mean, the fact is, we all unions lose not most, but a majority of the elections that they run. It's it's not like you're not going up against moneyed interest. So, and we don't have money. We got a little bit of money, but nothing compared to corporate America. So
right,
you're constantly in a fight.
The imbalance in money, the imbalance in resources overall, the imbalance in the law.
Legislature. It's a nightmare.
The judges, you name it, it's all stacked against us. So we're going to lose, and we're going to lose maybe more than we win. But again, you have to pick yourselves up. You have to pick each other up, dust each other off when you get knocked down. You can't stay down because the other side won't stay down. We have to learn from our failures and our mistakes, and we try again better. So that's what we do.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.